Hey, everybody.
Hello.
How's everything going?
It's okay.
You guys enjoying the warmer weather?
Yeah, I actually am.
Are you? Yeah, it was weird.
I watched the soccer game this weekend and didn't feel like I was dying.
Yeah, I went out in like 24-degree weather and it felt practically balmy. This is one of the things that we'll talk about when we get to talking about thermoregulation, but this idea that organisms acclimate. One of the ways in which we deal with changing temperature is through acclimation, which is just a physiological change in kind of what our temperature set point is. And so, you know, today it's warmer than it has been, and so we go outside and we can tolerate temperatures that, you know, 2 months ago would have been unbearable for us. When March gets here and it's up in the 50s, people will be walking around in shorts and t-shirts because they've been subjected to this extreme cold this winter. But if you are walking around on campus at the end of September and the beginning of October and it drops to 50, you're throwing on jackets and sweaters because it's cold, because you've then been acclimated to warm temperatures all throughout the summertime. So those kinds of changes that you see in yourself, amphibians and reptiles also go through those acclimation responses to changing weather, changing yearly cycles of weather. And so we'll talk about that. That's just one of many ways in which amphibians and reptiles can cope with changing temperatures. But you guys do the same. You're in this way no different than an amphibian or a reptile. Why is my video not on? There's my video. All right. Questions about last time? Nothing? Okay. After we finish going through the reptiles, which we should hopefully finish today, I think we're about a day behind schedule according to the daily schedule. The next thing that we're going to be doing is talking about biogeography, which is, I believe, chapter 5 in the textbook, if I'm recalling correctly. Yeah. So chapter 5 deals with biogeography. In order for you to think about the biogeography of amphibians and reptiles adequately, you have to remind yourself of some earth science material that you probably haven't seen since maybe 8th grade. Things like continental drift and how plate tectonics operates, and sort of what the age of the earth was at different times when these large land masses were moving around. So definitely by Friday, you should have read chapter 5. And then the other thing is our first literature summary is coming up on March 3rd. It is in the February 28th to March 6th group of materials. It's a paper by Helmuth et al., 2014. And what it attempts to do is it attempts to think about biogeography, the geographic distribution of organisms, and how that biogeography, those biogeographic patterns, are being altered by human beings who move around the world. And as we move around the world, we inadvertently, or sometimes on purpose, pick up organisms from one part of the world and transplant them in another part of the world. And it talks about how those things are actually leading to disruptions in biogeographic patterns that biogeographers have traditionally studied. And it has a focus in particular on amphibians and reptiles, in particular one group of lizards. And so the title of the paper is Biogeography in the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is the name that is given to this particular part of time in history where where human beings are the dominant life form on the planet, and as a result are affecting all aspects of life on the planet. And so anyway, I thought it was a pretty interesting article when it came out. So last couple of years, it's been included in the list of things to read. So it's up there. You'll also notice that when you open up that folder, that not only is there a PDF of the article itself, but there is also can you guys see Moodle on my screen? There's also a copy of the grading rubric. This is a slightly different grading rubric from the grading rubric that you had in evolution and ecology, mainly in that the grading scale has been altered somewhat. So take a look at that as you go through and prepare your literature summary. On the day of the class, I will spin a random wheel and select one of you to basically lead discussion. So all of you should come prepared to be the leader of discussion. If we were in a larger class, we would break you up into small groups to do this. But since there's only 5 of us maximum, we'll just do it all together. And so rather than me taking that load, I will farm that load out to you guys. So read it, prepare your literature summary, and be prepared to lead discussion. You don't have to, nobody has to prepare any slides or anything. We've all read the paper by the time we get there. Your job is just going to be to lead us through, and in an effort to get everybody prepared, just know that it could be any of you at the time. And just like when we've been walking through the families, I'm going to be there to chime in when I think we need to pay attention to a point that wasn't made. But that's not any big deal. That's just kind of normal. So March 3rd, so that's next Wednesday. We do not have class on Wednesday, but we will have class on Thursday. On Thursday, we will begin working through the reptiles in lab. So I'll expect to see you on Thursday. Wednesday is one of the spring break days, the second of these, I guess it is. And we've been instructed to treat it as if it is actually a spring break day. So if you're expecting to see your faculty members in office hours and things like that on Wednesday, don't have that expectation, because we are under strict orders from the provost to literally take that day off and treat it as if it was spring break. So I will not be in my office, but I will be around on Tuesday and Thursday like normal. All right, questions about all that? Where were we when we ended up? We were about to transition to snakes, weren't we?
I think we started on the snakes.
Oh, we had started on the snakes, hadn't we? Because who was talking about, Elizabeth was talking about boas and pythons. I just need to find where it is in the presentation. For some reason, my computer is slow as can be today. And I think we had pretty much finished up with them, haven't we, Elizabeth?
Yeah, we talked about like people releasing their pythons and boas in Florida.
Yep. Okay. So we were talking about the issue of invasive species in these particular 2 families in southern Florida. Did I mention that there's a reality show or 2 of people who go out into the Everglades and find pythons? and there's actually a bounty on them, so you can have them weighed and measured and turn them into Florida Fish and Wildlife and receive a bounty payment for catching these things. And I think I told you that my plan for retirement is to move to Florida and do this for a living. Probably not, but it's fun to think about at least. All right, Rose. Oh, no, not Rose. Kira, talk to us about the Viperids.
Okay, so they're known as the vipers. They're terrestrial, arboreal, or semi-aquatic and found in habitats ranging from rainforests to deserts to high mountains. The terrestrial vipers are normally heavily bodied, and the arboreal species are normally slimmer. They have long fangs that are the sole teeth attached to hinged maxillary bones, and then the fangs fold against the roof of the mouth when they're not in use. Most small species eat lizards or amphibians. Also, juveniles eat small lizards or amphibians, and then the adults consume mammals. And they also occur from low to high elevations. And this was about the rattlesnake. The tip of their tail is modified to a rattle, which is composed of interlocking segments of keratin. And then the vibration of the tail causes portions of the segments to rub against one another, producing an anti-predator defense. And then nearly all pit vipers are viviparous, and the parental care of neonates or egg clutches frequent among crotolines, and they also lack pit organs.
Who likes pit organs?
All vipers.
All vipers lack pit organs.
Viper.
In the Viperidae, the subfamily.
Viper in viper.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, my bad.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So anybody in the family Viperidae could be considered a viper, but then there are two subfamilies, Viperidae and the pit vipers, the Crotalidae. So pit vipers are the ones with the thermal pits, and the true vipers are the ones without the pits. And when you look at this photo, you can see there's a thermal pit in this crotalin, and that thermal pit is missing here. There's a hole here, but that's actually just the nostril, which you can see the nostril here on a crotalin, the nostril here on a viperid, but there's this pit that is between the eye and the nostril that is present in the crotalins and absent in the viperids. So you mentioned that almost all of them are viviparous. What proportion of them are viviparous, and how many of them are not viviparous and lay eggs instead?
I don't know that.
Okay, there's only one species that lays eggs in this whole group. Do you know what it is? Then probably not. Yeah, okay. It's Lachesis muta, the bushmaster, which is a Central American species, and it lays eggs. And it actually coils up around the eggs and guards the eggs, and actually can shiver. It develops a shivering response to produce metabolic heat production by contracting and relaxing the muscles. And so they actually, not only do they guard the eggs, but if the temperature falls in the environments that they're in, because oftentimes they're in rainforests and sometimes at high elevations where it's shady and cool, and they will actually create metabolic heat in order to incubate the eggs. And so there's only one species in this whole family, though, that lays eggs, and that's it. What type of venom do they generally produce? Is their venom a neurotoxic venom, or is it a hemolytic type of venom?
I want to say hemolytic, but I'm not sure.
You want to say hemolytic because that is exactly the right answer. All right, any questions about the viperids? All right, Colubridae. Colubridae is complicated. So I'm going to just introduce some things in terms of thinking about phylogeny here, and then I'll let Rose and Kelsey and Quinn take on these three families that are complicated. So Colubridae used to be this family where if you couldn't figure out what family a particular snake species belonged to, Colubridae kind of over time became this catch-all grab bag of species that didn't fit tidily into any of these other groupings. And as a result, when people started to do phylogenetic systematics on this group, we find that the Colubridae is a polyphyletic taxonomic group that was made up of two branches, with the Elapids, the coral snakes, sea snakes, and kraits embedded within what was traditionally the Colubridae, which then made that a polyphyletic taxonomic group. And modern taxonomy is not supposed to erect polyphyletic groups. And so what happened as a result of this phylogeny is most, if not all, of these subfamilies have now been elevated to family status. And there's a new family, the Colubridae, that has actually been split up. This is no longer the Colubridae. This is just a figure that is in your textbook. Your textbook is out of date a little on this front. So now we have a family Colubridae, which is the old Colubridae. We have a family Dipsadidae, which is this old subfamily, and we have a family Natricidae, which is this family. And so these families don't appear as families in your book, but they appear as subfamilies in your book. And this is mainly just a problem with publishing a textbook. You only update the textbooks every so many years. And so in the latest version of this textbook, the taxonomy of this group of snakes is not really up to date. So that leads us to Rose to talk to us about the colubrids, what remains in the Colubridae. So just before you begin, this used to be a slide that had many more species and many more genera. And what I did was, as I updated my slides to divide things into the Dipsadidae and the Natricidae, I just subtracted the totals that are in those families from this family. And so that's why there's an earlier version of the slides that has different numbers in it, and you should pay attention to this version of the slides. So Rose, go ahead.
Okay, so like you just said, I have that they're still called the largest group of snakes. Most of them have wide scales on their bellies and usually 9 large scales on top of their head, which helps for identification. Most cobrids also have glands behind their eye, and their venom is not as strong as some of the other species of snakes, and so it takes a couple minutes to work. So their prey has time to run away, and then they have to track it. And
wait a minute. Which species of colubrids are venomous?
I don't know. This is just what I found doing my research. It didn't say that some of them were or weren't.
Okay. What you're going to find is that Colubridae now doesn't have any venomous species. All of those species are now in the family Dipsadidae.
Okay, I'm wondering if I found like an old resource.
You probably found a resource that was dumping the Dipsadidae into the Colubridae. Yep. So just continue, but just parse that information out.
Yeah. Okay, I deleted that. So I have.
I just don't want to confuse other people in the class.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No. So some spend most of their time underground, and some also climb into trees and shrubs, and others also live in water. There's a wide variety that they can live in and in habitat, and they can also live in freshwater habitats, and some of them can live in saltier water in order to eat crabs.
Okay, once again, I think you're actually now confusing Once again, because of this splitting up, you're describing what sounds to me more like the Natricidae, which are the water snakes. So the Colubridae is pretty much terrestrial and arboreal nowadays in the new division. None of them are venomous species. There aren't any of them that I can think of that I would classify as aquatic primarily. They, as far as I know, they are all egg-laying species. There's no live birth, no Viperidae in the group. And yeah, they're just kind of your general snake. This includes things like king snakes. In North America, that's mainly what it includes. Actually, is the king snakes. And this is the problem with colubrids. Like, thinking about them as a distinctive group is difficult because they're largely characterized by what they're not. And this is probably the thing that you'll notice about them in lab, is you arrive at Colubridae by just factoring out everything else that they could be, and then, oh, okay, they're colubrids. So yeah, you guys had a difficult task because of the changing taxonomy. So did you have anything else that you wanted to touch on?
No.
Okay, all right, good enough. That was a tough job. My apologies for that being a tough job. These are the colubrids. So what was in the Colubridae is now the Colubridae. So this is actually a rat snake. Oh, so we have king snakes here in Missouri, and we also have rat snakes in Missouri, and the fox snake is in Missouri. Those are all in this family, Colubridae. Then the other two families that we need to think about are the Dipsadidae and the Natricidae, which are Kelsey first. So let's think about the Dipsadidae, Kelsey.
Yep, so there's 752 species in 96 genera. They're found in most of the Americas, and they're most diverse in South America. It's a large subfamily of the colubridae snakes. It's a really diverse group. Some are arboreal, but others are aquatic or terrestrial. They're diverse in terms of their habitat and their diet. Almost all species are completely harmless to humans, but there are some that are mildly venomous. They're rear-fanged. Some are like very specialized in their diet. So there's the toad specialist and then the siren specialist. And most of them are oviparous.
Yep, so most of them lay eggs. You mentioned that almost all species are venomous but harmless to humans. Do you know of a species that is venomous and not harmless to humans?
No.
So there is a species in Africa called the boomslang, which is very venomous. That's a common name. I can't remember the scientific name at the moment. This is a group, back when Colubridae was this big catch-all family, there was this subgroup that people would refer to, and you would hear them talking about it at meetings and things like this, the rear-fanged colubrids. Well, the rear-fanged colubrids are the members of the family Dipsadidae. And here in Missouri, we have the hognose snakes, Heterodon, the ringneck snakes, Diodophus, Carphophus, cannot remember the common name of Carphophus at the moment. And then in extreme southeastern Missouri, down in the Boot Heel, we get Pharanthia, which is the mud snake. These are all members of the Dipsadidae. This is a tiny snake. It has a rear fang. It is mildly venomous, but it's so tiny that it would never be able to really bite you. We're going to see these commonly when we go collecting when the weather warms up, and you can just reach right down and grab these. Same thing is true with any of these other species. Here in the United States, we really don't have to worry about any of these being harmful. Did you learn anything special about the genus Heterodon when you were looking through this stuff, Kelsey?
Just that they eat toads.
Okay, so they are toad eaters. Anything else about them behaviorally?
No, I didn't see anything.
Yeah, when you harass a hognose snake, they will tend to feign death. They will turn over on their back. They'll open their mouth, their tongue will hang out, and they'll lay there for a few minutes looking dead. And then when you stop harassing them, they will slowly turn themselves back over and slither away. Not sure what advantage there is to playing dead, but it's believed to be an anti-predator mechanism. Ferencia, I mentioned in the slide, is a specialist on sirens. They're very difficult to keep in captivity because of this. The Heterodon, the hognose snakes, they're toad specialists. One of the ways in which toads avoid predation is they will puff up their body filled with air. And what hognose snakes do is they will basically start ingesting the toad. And as the toad fills itself up with air to make it too big to go into the mouth of the toad, or mouth of the snake rather, the snake will actually use its rear fangs to essentially puncture the toad and deflate the toad, so that now the toad will be easy enough to swallow. Diodophus basically is a specialist on ground-dwelling invertebrates in parts of the world where there are centipedes that are found in abundance. You will actually find them specializing on centipedes in some parts of their range. Of these, of course, Diodophus and Carphophus are more terrestrial, and then Ferencia and Heterodon are more on the aquatic side. And then we have Quinn with the Natricidae.
So there are 225 species. They are found in Eastern North America and Europe, Southern Asia and Africa. Most of them are associated with water, so they're known as water snakes. The New World ones are viviparous, and their diets are extremely variable between each species.
Yeah, and these are also, they tend towards dietary specialty. So you guys probably don't remember this, but back in evolutionary ecology, when we were studying the snake newt case study at the end of the semester, the garter snake, one of the predator in that case was a garter snake that fed on newts. And one of the reasons that it's thought that this predator-prey arms race could get started is because it's easy to escape an arms race if you can just go and eat something else. But as it turns out, garter snakes are very much dietary specialists. And we talked briefly in that case study about a set of studies done by a guy named Steve Arnold at the University of Chicago, where he basically swapped different kinds of prey with cotton swabs and presented these cotton swabs to baby garter snakes from different species from different parts of the United States, and found that there was a species-specific set of scents that garter snakes would respond to. When garter snakes perceive a scent that they equate with food, one of the things that you'll notice is that their tongue flick rate goes up. So the rate at which they tongue flick, that they put their tongue out there to gather scent particles, if they're interested in something, they tongue flick a lot. And if they're not interested in something, there will be a momentary increase in tongue flick while they assess what that is that you just stepped in front of their face. But then that tongue flick rate goes way down very quickly in terms of frequency. And what he found was that if you put a newt smell in front of a slug specialist species, they didn't respond to that at all. But if you gave them the smell of slugs, they responded very highly to that. And so in this group, they are, in many cases, dietary specialists, and that dietary specialization is driven heavily by their sense of smell and assessing prey on the basis of their sense of smell. So we have garter snakes that are muse specialists, we have garter snakes that are slug specialists, we have garter snakes that are fish specialists, ones that are frog and toad specialists. So there aren't many of them that are just kind of generalist sort of snakes. Questions about the Natricidae?
What was the, oh, sorry. What was the musk glands supposed to represent?
Oh, so one of the things that you'll notice the first time you pick up a water snake is there are musk glands located at the back of the body near the cloaca. And when you pick them up, they will writhe around and they will exude this musk. It's a very distinctive smell. Musk glands are oftentimes stronger in aquatic snakes. So among the Viperidae, if you pick up a cottonmouth, you will also notice its smell. But not that you should be picking up cottonmouths, by the way. The cottonmouth, Echistrodon piscivorus, it's an aquatic species. It's one of the pit vipers. Do not pick it up if you find it, although we're outside of its range here. But one of the things, so anyway, it just smells bad. And it smells bad enough that if you're a predator, you might actually just put the snake down because of it. There have been times in East Texas when I was back in graduate school where I've been walking around the forest of East Texas and I've smelled a cottonmouth before I could actually see it. That's how strong the musk glands can be in some of these kinds of snakes. I'd be walking around and I would smell it, and then that would alert me to the presence of it, and then I would step more carefully and look around and identify where that snake was, so that I knew where it was, so I didn't accidentally step on it and get bitten. Other questions? We will see our share of water snakes. Nerodia cipodon is one of the most common snakes that we will see at one of the sites that we will go when we go dew field collecting later in the semester. All right, the elapids. The elapids are the cobras, the coral snakes, mambas, kraits, and sea snakes. Now, depending on the taxonomy, some people split the sea snakes out into their own family, the Hydrophiidae. But your textbook still treats them as a subset of the Elapidae. Once again, you'll see from the phylogeny that the Elapidae are embedded in what was traditionally the Colubridae. These guys have primarily neurotoxic venom. They have the proteroglyph dentition, so they have a forward fixed fang, so a fang on the front of the mouth. Excuse me. I feel like I'm about to sneeze. This forward fixed fang is generally smaller than what you see in the Viperidae, and it's fixed, meaning that it doesn't hinge up. It's always in place, projecting downward. Some of these can be quite long. So for example, a king cobra is 5 meters or more in length. A good number of species in quite a few genera, especially when you start including the sea snakes in there. Here in the United States, all of the members of the family Elapidae are what we call coral snakes. When you get into the old world, that's where you get cobras, mambas, and kraits. Cobras are oftentimes terrestrial. Kraits are terrestrial. Mambas are almost exclusively arboreal. As a matter of fact, the genus of the mambas is Dendroaspis. It's the tree-dwelling venomous snake, essentially, Dendroaspis. B here is a coral snake. This is actually Micrurus fulvius, I think. This is one of the hooded cobras from Southeast Asia. This is a sea snake in the Elapidae or the family Hydrophiidae. This is a relatively drab sea snake, but some of these can come in very bold colors, which some people believe is aposematic coloration. This is a crate. You see that it is much more heavily bodied, has kind of an appearance that looks more like an old world viper than an elapid. But once again, there are aspects of the scalation of the head that will clue you into the fact that this is not a viper, but is actually an elapid. This is a green mamba. It's an arboreal species, and as you can see, it's much more slender than the terrestrial species. So the heavy bodiedness that's already been mentioned versus the slenderness of snakes is oftentimes more correlated with where they live rather than what their taxonomic affinity is. Coral snakes can be sometimes difficult to tell apart from non-venomous colubrid snakes, and so one should always be careful when picking up, especially in the United States, any brightly colored snake. This becomes even more problematic when you go down to the tropics. So in the United States, there's an old saying, red on yellow kill a fellow, red on black friend of Jack, to separate the coral snakes that occur in the United States from king snakes and milk snakes that occur in the United States. But unfortunately, that only applies here in the United States. On Thursday, I'll bring up my 2-volume set of the venomous reptiles of the Western Hemisphere, and you'll see that if you get down into southern Mexico, Costa Rica, Guatemala, places like that, there are a lot of coral snakes that take on all manners of coloration. And so you need to be very good with your taxonomy in certain parts of the world to avoid inadvertently picking up a coral snake and getting, in some cases, fatally bitten by them. This is the range of the elapids, and you can see that they occur pretty much all over the world in tropical to subtropical regions. They can occur in everything from rainforests to deserts. And then, of course, the dotted lines represent the ranges of the hydrophian sea snakes. You'll notice that you don't find a lot of these out in wide open ocean, but you'll generally see them in the shallower waters of archipelagos. But I've never seen a sea snake. I would love to see a sea snake sometime. All right, questions about snakes? All right, I'll handle the rest of the amphibians because there just aren't that many of them. The Crocodilia is the order that the alligators and crocodiles are in. They have thecodont teeth, which are different from acrodont and pleurodont. Go back and refer to that diagram earlier in this PowerPoint on the different teeth type. They have webbed feet, so they have webbing between their feet. They're aquatic. They spend a lot of their lives in water, and so that would be an adaptation for swimming. They also use a laterally compressed tail for locomotion. They have a very long secondary palate, so they have a bony roof to the roof of their mouth. They're oviparous. They build nests. They exhibit parental care both in guarding the nest and also in guarding the new offspring after they hatch. When they build the nest to provide a proper thermoregulatory environment for the developing embryos inside the eggs. They'll actually dig the nest out if it's getting too hot, and then they'll put more vegetation back on the nest if it's getting too cold. This is a type of behavior that we also see in certain species of birds. They have temperature-dependent sex determination, and so the nest temperature is very important from the standpoint of determining the sex ratio. And this group is divided up into 3 families: the Alligatoridae, the Crocodilidae, and the Gavialidae. Not very many species. If you're studying alligators and crocodiles, it's a really small number of species to focus your attention on. The Alligatoridae can be distinguished by how their teeth fit into pits in the upper jaw, and as a result, they're not visible when the mouth is closed, as opposed to both the crocodiles and the gharials, where you can see the teeth. In the United States, the sole representative we have in the United States is the American alligator in the southeastern United States, all the way over into Texas. So that's alligator missympiasis, and then the caimans are the ones that are in Central and South America. Oh, and also alligators are one of these groups that has this weird disjunct population where we find them in the United States, especially in the eastern United States, and also there are these relic species that are over in China. So similar kind of distribution that you see in the giant salamanders, the Cryptobranchidae. So once again, thinking about biogeography, what are these repeating patterns of geographic distribution, and what might have caused these repeating patterns in geographic distribution? This U.S. Eastern Asia connection is repeated in a number of different groups. The Crocodilidae has the 4th tooth in the lower jaw accommodated by a notch in the upper jaw that allows it to be visible when the mouth is closed. So that's different than the situation with that same tooth in the Alligatoridae. More species of crocodiles than alligators. They occur throughout, once again, tropical, subtropical regions throughout the world. The crocodiles are the largest group, the largest members of this group. The saltwater crocodiles in Australia in particular are known to become amazingly large in size, such that they can be life-threatening to humans, because that alligator could easily down that dude if that dude hadn't just killed that crocodile. So, and then the last group are the gharials and false gharials. These are fish specialists, and their morphology is reflective of this. They have really thin jaws that allow them to move their jaws very quickly in water to catch fast-moving fish. And all of their teeth are visible when the mouth is closed, as you can see there. They are the thin-jawed, toothy crocodiles. And once again, they have a limited distribution in Southeast Asia and the Indian subcontinent and Western China, and only 2 species in this group. 2 species, each species is in its own genus. Those are some of the coolest looking crocodiles in my mind. But that's the Crocodilia. And then that brings us to the end of our survey of the reptiles, which is the turtles and tortoises. The most distinctive thing about turtles and tortoises is that they have this shell that has kind of taken over and dictated many other aspects of their morphology. So we have the carapace, which are elaborations of the vertebral column, and that's the dorsal surface of the shell. And then the plastron is the underside of the shell, which is basically outgrowths of the ribs. So you basically have the vertebral column growing down to meet the ribs that are growing up, and that is what forms the 2 portions of the shell. The pectoral and pelvic girdles are found between the ribs and the vertebra, and so they're embedded in there. We'll look at some skeletons of some turtles in lab on Thursday, so you can kind of see how all of that is arranged. They've lost their teeth, so they're unlike the other reptiles that all have teeth. And there's that is a misspelling. Keratinous beak. I obviously didn't look through these carefully enough. So they have a beak made of keratin that can be quite sharp. Do not put your fingers or hands near any turtle that we pick up, even something that is as innocuous as a box turtle, because even though box turtles are not particularly aggressive, if they do reach out and bite you, they can easily snip off the tip of your finger, because that beak is very sharp in most cases. Mainly because when the mouth closes, the two halves of the beak, the upper jaw and lower jaw, they constantly grind against one another, so they're constantly sharpening their beaks against one another as they feed. These guys have an anapsid skull, which means they don't have any of those temporal fossa in the skull, and they are all oviparous. Yeah, so here's a figure of them. So here we see the vertebra and elaborations of the ribs, and then this is just an entire bony case that is made of a lot of the skeletal fusion. You can see that the pelvic girdle and the pectoral girdle are attached to the vertebral column and the ribs up here, and then they're free at the bottom for the most part, except the pelvic girdle down here. And then they're usually capable of just pulling their legs into their bodies through these openings in the carapace. Same thing with the head. They can either pull the head into the protective boundaries of the shell, or in things like the side neck turtles, they'll actually pull their head to the side and bring their head and neck over and protect it under the lip of the carapace. In most cases, the underlying bones don't have anything to do with these scales that are on top of them. And so you'll see that there are many more vertebrae than there are surface scales. And actually, the presence of scales is oftentimes important in identifying different species from one another, especially within a family or within a genus. The structure and arrangement of the scales and how many they possess is variable among species. You don't need to know the names of all of these bones. You should know marginal scutes, vertebral scutes, and costal scutes, but beyond that, you don't need to know the underlying bones and things like that. And you only need to know these kinds of scalation characters because they're important in identifying a couple of species that we'll identify in lab. Once again, there's a lot of fusion in the skull, and there's also this bony. In many cases, there's a bony support underlying the beak of the species, and there once again is no teeth in the jaw at all. This is where the neck muscles attach, and so you will oftentimes find that there are these deep emarginations into the skull of turtles and tortoises, and part of that is just this process of controlling the neck and head and pulling that neck and head into the shell. In the United States, we have quite a few families represented. The Dromaeochelidae, the Cheloniidae, these are both sea turtle groups. The Colubridae, which are the snapping turtles. Caenosternidae, which are the mud and musk turtles. The Testudinidae, which is the tortoises. The Elapidae, which are the pond turtles. And the Trionychidae, which are the soft-shell turtles. There's fossil evidence that shows that most of these families are quite old in terms of their fossil presence in the fossil record, and so this is generally viewed as an ancient group in terms of their origins. So Trionychidae are the soft-shell turtles. They are called the soft-shell turtles because they lack a bony carapace and plastron. It's instead covered with this leathery skin. They have flattened bodies. They have really long necks. They have really sharp, strong jaws. Once again, a reduced skeleton in the carapace and plastron. They are almost exclusively aquatic. They will occasionally come out on land to bask, but as soon as you get anywhere close to them, they're in the water in a heartbeat. A friend of mine and I used to go when we were in school together. We would go to the local sewage treatment plant, and at sewage treatment plants they always have ponds around the sewage treatment plant. And the sewage treatment plant there in Nacogdoches, Texas, had a lot of soft-shell turtles in them, and it was very difficult to get soft-shell turtles for a collection. But there was a road that went around the ponds for the sewage plant workers to monitor the ponds. And so we could, through our binoculars, we would spy where there were some soft-shell turtles up on the bank, and we would cruise around a couple of times to basically get them used to the idea of a passing car, so that they don't just go and run for the water immediately. And then after we had kind of gotten them used to us driving around in circles, we would slow down a little bit, take a slow pass, and as the car was slowing down, one of us would jump out of the car while it was still moving, run down to the water's edge and snag the turtle before it realized what was happening, and jet it into the water. And about once every 15th time that would work, and we would actually catch a turtle. Very strong swimmers, surprisingly fast on land, and you really want to avoid the mouth end of them because their necks are much longer than you expect, and they can sometimes reach around more than half of their body length to bite behind them. And so you definitely want to be handling these things from the tail end. This is the proboscis that I mentioned, and so they will oftentimes be in the water, and they will just poke nothing more than their proboscis above the water to get a breath of air. And you can see that there's no scutes on the back of this thing. It's just this leathery skin covering the carapace. And they have a wide range in the United States. The Elapidae are the pond and box turtles. Box turtles are the terrestrial versions of this, and the pond turtles are freshwater and brackish water turtles and terrapins. There's a species called the terrapin, the Gulf Coast terrapin or the Atlantic terrapin, that lives along the coast of the Atlantic and then into the Gulf of Mexico. These guys are omnivorous. They eat plants, they eat fish, they eat amphibians. They'll eat pretty much anything that they can find. The box turtles in particular have a hinged plastron, and what they'll do is they'll pull that plastron up on both sides, and they will at that point have tucked themselves totally inside this bony case, such that it's difficult sometimes to even fit a little sliver of paper between where the plastron meets the carapace. And if we see box turtles, which we almost always do see box turtles when we're out running around, you'll see that their first response is to pull their head in, pull their legs in, and then pull the plastron up. We're right at the boundary between two species of box turtles here in Missouri. So there's an eastern box turtle and a western species of box turtle, and you're likely to find both of them when you're out collecting. So this is just your typical pond turtle, red ear slider, painted turtles, these types of turtles, and then of course the box turtles are a part of this group. In some parts of the world, because of the pet trade, red ear sliders from North America have become established. So for example, you can find red ear sliders in certain parts of Hawaii and places where they just clearly don't belong. The Testudines are the tortoises. These guys have a high domed carapace and what we call elephantine feet, big round columnar feet and legs that project mostly downward from the body. They're herbivorous, quite a few species. We have 2 to 4 species here in the United States, once again, depending on whose taxonomy you're looking at. We have a species that lives in the southeastern United States that are commonly referred to as gopher tortoises. And then we have a species that lives in southern Texas called the Texas tortoise. that are adorably cute. And then we have the desert tortoise that lives out in the Mojave Desert in the desert southwest of the United States. All three of these species are protected by law because people have primarily altered their habitat. Although in some cases, like in the case of the Texas tortoise, they've also been collected in the past for pet trade animals. Tortoises also make up these large, gigantic island species that you see in zoos. They're found in places like the Seychelles and the Galapagos and places like this. So some of these species can get quite large. But once again, the high domed carapace. Oh, and in these guys, in many cases, the scutes, this is one of the few groups where the scutes on the body actually conform to the underlying bony elements. Occurs in tortoises where it doesn't occur in the other groups of turtles. Testudines are the mud and musk turtles. These are highly aquatic. They're called musk turtles because they once again produce this foul-smelling musk secreted by glands located at the cloaca. We have two species here in Missouri. Well, three species here in Missouri. Two species of mud turtle and one musk turtle. They also have a domed carapace, but they have much more aquatic-like feet than a tortoise does. And once again, this is one of those groups where knowing details about the marginal scutes will be important to tell, at least in Missouri, the two species of mud turtles apart from one another. Colubridae are the snapping turtles. These guys have very, very large heads, very powerful jaws, a reduced plastron. So there's a bony element of the plastron, but there's also a lot of fleshy parts on the underside of the animal. If you ever hear of people going noodling, are you guys familiar with the term noodling? Elizabeth, what is noodling?
So usually it's when you go fishing, but like you're in the water and you use your hand and you have to like stick your hand under like rocks and areas looking for I guess like catfish, largemouthed fish.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you catch them by the fish biting your hand and then you pulling your hand out. The family Colubridae is why you should not do that. Because in those same places where you'll find those types of fish, you will also find snapping turtles, and they will literally remove your digits from you if you engage in that. And this is a common snapping turtle. It's common around here. It's one of the most common snapping turtles, one of the most common turtles that we see on our road surveys at certain times of year. A lot of snapping turtles found dead on the road. But they have large, powerful jaws, very sharp beaks, and will remove your digits super easily. The alligator snapping turtle, which I don't think I have a picture of in this presentation, are even larger. They have a modified tongue that's pink, and they just sit underground with their mouth open with that pink tongue hanging out. It looks like a worm. And when fish come in to try and get the worm, this vermiform tongue, they just snap their jaws closed on the fish, in many cases cutting the fish in half. And if you happen to be noodling and get near the mouth of the snapping turtle, you're going to lose digits. I went to southern Louisiana, once again, back when I was in graduate school, and met some people who farm turtles for food. It's a pretty common thing in southern Louisiana to have commercial turtle farms where they grow mostly common snapping turtles. But any place in southern Louisiana where you're growing snapping turtles, you are also, the common snappers, you're also probably going to have alligator snappers in those same ponds. And I talked to 3 or 4 people who own these turtle farms, and all of them had lost at least one digit that had been amputated by a turtle. So these are not to be messed around with. And if we find any of these live while we're out in the field, I'll instruct you in how to handle them appropriately. And then I think this is the end, the Cheloniidae and the Dermochelidae. These are the sea turtles. The Dermochelidae is the only member of the leatherback is the only member of the Dermochelidae. This is the largest of the sea turtles, and it lacks scutes, much like the softshell turtles do. All the other sea turtles in the family Cheloniidae have scutes. These guys are known for long distance migrations. The females will lay eggs on a beach. When the eggs hatch, the young offspring scramble down the beach, go into the water, and they will pick up chemical cues from their environment, such that when they then swim out, at least the ones in Texas and along the Gulf Coast do this, they swim out to the Sargasso Sea off the east coast of the United States. They live there for a really long time, feeding mainly on jellyfish. And when they reach sexual maturity, they will find their way back to the very beaches that they were hatched on. And so they have amazing abilities to pick up chemical cues in the water and navigate back to their beaches, in spite of the fact that they'll swim thousands of miles between when they're babies and when they finally return. And I'm going to see if this guy will work. That guy will not work. Let me copy this. I didn't check to see if this link was active. But some of these mating aggregations, these egg-laying aggregations, they're not really mating. They've already mated out at sea, can be quite large. And I think what I have here is a video taken by a guy named Archie Carr back in the 1940s or 50s of this. No, 1947. So that's a baby turtle, and this is a mass aggregation of sea turtles coming out on a beach in Mexico. And this is the abundance that sea turtles used to have. Literally tens of thousands of turtles coming out in this mass egg-laying event. And a guy named Archie Carr attempted to quantify how many turtles were on this beach based on film footage of this guy who was flying up and down the beach, recording turtles. And you can see, it's just kind of boggles the imagination, given how few sea turtles are still around now. With the rise of commercial fisheries and using things like these big seine nets that are hauled behind trawlers, they oftentimes would inadvertently collect sea turtles. The sea turtles get trapped down in the nets. They can't come up for air, and then they end up dying in fishing nets. And there was a move back in the 1990s to equip fishing nets with turtle excluder devices that would protect turtles from entering the nets in the first place. But sea turtles are all on the endangered or threatened list now, mainly because of commercial fishing, where they are an inadvertent part of what we refer to as bycatch, or people going to beaches where sea turtles are known to lay eggs and collecting the eggs and feeding on the eggs, as well as just natural predators that also will dig up the eggs. And that finishes the reptiles. Questions? All right, biogeography on Friday, reptiles in lab on Thursday. And I will see you then.
I have a question about the dichotomous
Yeah.
key really fast.
Oh yeah.
So for the two that are the same, I'm blanking on the name, versicolor, and then the other one that I'm blanking on.
Yeah.
Are we supposed to just put them together on our dichotomous key?
Just put them together because, once again, if you're using a dichotomous key in the field, you don't have your handy dandy microscope out and the equipment to draw some blood and look at the different sizes of the blood cells, or you don't have your portable thumb drive sequencer. So yeah, just put them together.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Yep.
Is it
Yep.
okay if I did put that you can distinguish between them if you hear their like trills?
Yeah, sure.
But
yeah,
then underneath
yeah.
it, I put a note that said that they're identical. So if you didn't hear it before you.
Yep. So that
Okay.
that is the other way in which you can distinguish them is by voice, but you have to be out collecting them at night when they are calling in order to do that. But yeah, that's totally appropriate. Sure. Rose, you're still there?
Oh yeah, sorry. Bye.
Wait, you're still on for 8:30 on Thursday?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, good deal.
And I was going to ask if you could open the lab on Tuesday. I was going to try to go in on Wednesday, even though I know it's a day. But if you can't unlock it, then I'll just go in on Tuesday during the day.
I can unlock it on Wednesday if you want to go in on Wednesday, but I can also
But
unlock
if you're
it
not
on
going to be
Tuesday.
on campus, I don't want to make you come.
Rose, I live 9 blocks away.
Yeah,
And
but
I'm probably-
it's a spring break day. You wouldn't come to campus on a spring break day. No, it's really fine. I'll come on
Actually,
Tuesday.
I'm probably going to be doing either DNA isolation or PCR on Wednesday, so I'm probably going to be up here anyway. What I'm not going to be is I'm not going to be available to students like I would normally be on a Wednesday.
Okay.
Because normally I would be doing field work on spring break. So.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll unlock it tomorrow morning when I get in, assuming that Dr. Shi isn't still using the room for testing. He had some students who needed to make a lab practical because they were away on a softball trip. So I don't remember if he was going to be using our room for that or he was going to be doing it in the other room. So I might not be able to let you in on Tuesday because of that, but I'll know that later on today and I'll just drop you an email.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Sure.